Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. We're going to wait for a couple of minutes to allow people to join. Those of us who are already in the room, if you want to share with us where you're joining from, that would be great. Welcome to those who are joining. We're giving a couple of minutes for people to join. If you want, please do share where you're based and where you're joining us from. And as a reminder, before we start, we are recording this event. We are also live streaming this event. So of course, feel free to keep your camera off if you don't want to be on the video. So we have Mexico, Greece, France, Brazil, Uruguay. Good representation. United States. Okay, fantastic. Great. So thank you for sharing. We are gonna get started. As you all know, today is November 25th. It is the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. And we're taking this opportunity at DataPop to reflect on 2 years of working with gender-based violence data and gender data more broadly. Our goal is to share the challenges that we have encountered working with GBV data in a variety of contexts, in a variety of countries. Starting with the fact that data about the prevalence of GBV is mostly inaccurate and inconsistently estimated over time. We know that there are gaps. We also don't know systematically what those gaps are. And we also know that GBV is underreported. So even the data we do have about gender-based violence usually reflects poorly on the prevalence, and does so to different levels and different extents, depending on the country, the location, or the subgroups of the population that we're talking about. Moreover, regarding GBV data management and statistics, we have encountered challenges regarding the centralization or the lack of centralization of gender-based violence, which hinders comparability, and also the fact that a lot of this data is not systematically accessible and neither up to date, right? This means that the privacy and the security of GBV data, among other things, varies a lot according to the location, the municipality, the country that we're talking about. And we're talking about data that qualifies as very sensitive data. So it does require thorough ethical and privacy protocols to work with. And these are some of the challenges that we're going to be discussing, but our goal is also to share lessons learned and opportunities based on our team's experience. Hopefully, this can help others that are working with this data, and we can join forces and continue fighting violence against women and promoting gender equality. So I see that we have a good cohort that has joined us. I want to launch a quick Zoom poll. Please take a moment to share your experience by answering the question that is going to pop up on your screen in just a moment. Great. So we'd like to know more about your experience working with gender-based violence data, if there is any. And while you take a moment to answer, I'm also going to recall you that we are recording the session for those who have just joined us. We're also live streaming it. And throughout the event, please remember that you can add any question you have directly on the chat. Our team of moderators will be looking at those questions, and we'll have a moment at the end of the event to go through those questions and discuss. So I'm going to give a couple more minutes for people to answer. I think we have 7 answers. In the meantime, I want to welcome and thank you to all our panelists who are joining us today, taking the time to share their experiences. And please, if you can, each of you in 1 minute, mention your name, your title at DPA, the country you're based in, and one piece of data that you think is important to highlight in the framework of this conversation. We can start in the order of our poster. So Zinia, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Julie. Hi, thank you for joining us. My name is Zinia del Villar, Data Science Director Research Team at Data Pop Alliance. I'm from Mexico, but I'm based in France since 12 years ago. And I would like to highlight a fact about underreporting. In Mexico, for example, 3 out of 10 women who suffer violence make a report or registers. In other words, approximately 70% of cases of violence against women do not exist in any database. Thank you.
Yesenia. Anna?
Thank you, Julie. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. My name is Anna. I'm a program and research manager at Data Pop Alliance. I'm from and I am based in Brazil. And my piece of data refers to one of the most serious institutional violences that the state could commit, which is the criminalization of abortion. Illegal or unsafe abortion is the main cause of maternal mortality today in Brazil. And according to researchers, between 2006 and 2015, 770 maternal deaths were registered as having abortion as the official cause. And the main victims of unsafe abortion in Brazil are Black women, children under 14 years old, and residents of the favelas. Thank you.
Thank you. So, thank you, Yoli. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for joining us. So I'm Yvette Yañez. I am based in Mexico, Mexico City. I'm a project manager in gender projects and also a communications manager at the Pop Alliance. And my piece of data has to do with the most lethal effect of gender inequality, and that is femicide. In Latin America specifically, the highest rates, so deaths by 100,000 people are seen in Honduras and in El Salvador. However, in terms of absolute numbers, the top countries are Brazil and Mexico. And in Mexico in particular, which is where I'm from, we're seeing, for example, a 5% increase when comparing January to October 2020 and to 21, which is very worrying. And then in something that is very related to that, in terms of human trafficking, also in Mexico, we have seen that has increased by a whopping 173%, which is of course linked to organized crime. Thank you.
Well, I guess I'm next, right, Julie? So hi, my name is Mateo Rojas, and I'm project and research manager here at DPA. I'm based in Bogota, Colombia, and I'm Colombian. The statistic I would like to mention also relates to abortion here in the country. And I bring it up because there's actually a timely discussion around this, because in the following weeks, in the next few weeks, the Constitutional Court will decide if abortion in Colombia will be legal or not. So according to a recent study published by La Mesa por la Vida y la Salud por las Mujeres, since 2008, each year 400 women are being prosecuted for illegal abortion in the country. And this implies institutional violence against women that is ongoing and that hopefully can be resolved in the next few weeks. Thanks.
Thank you, Mateo. Thank you, everyone. Those are impactful pieces of data. We are going to be discussing some of those issues a little bit further ahead. In the meantime, thank you to everyone that answered our poll. So I'm going to end it now, and you can, I believe, see the results on your screen. And the biggest challenge that appears is the fact that data is unavailable, right? That it doesn't exist. And this is something that we're going to be discussing further ahead. And we see also here echoed some of the challenges that we faced in terms of accessibility, in terms of data being incomplete, in terms of data not being intersectional, which is also an enormous challenge that we face. So with no further ado, let's jump into our first section. And to get started, I want to share a little bit about one of the projects that we have been working on at DataPop. So one of DataPop Alliance's 5 programs is Data for Gender Equality. And in collaboration with the GIZ, which is the German Bilateral Cooperation Agency, and UNIDAS, one of our most recent projects focused on better understanding why women and girls report or not violence. And in fact, survivors' ability to and willingness actually to report GBV depends on factors that range from personal, community, environmental factors that are not fully understood. And the goal of this project was to exactly better understand which factors are associated with underreporting, which we've mentioned as a challenge, and generate evidence to address them. So the project was undertaken in Mexico City, in Bogota, and in Sao Paulo. And across the cities, we identified that personal factors such as age and level of schooling, for example, were associated with underreporting. Similarly, neighborhood deprivation was also associated with underreporting. And structural factors such as poverty, structural racism, and that's particularly true in Brazil, were again also associated with underreporting. So the first question goes to Ana and to Mateo, who were both involved in this project. Could you tell us how you managed to, one, access the data sources in each of those 3 countries, which we know was a challenge, and particularly what were most salient in terms of these accessibility and availability challenges?
Yes, thank you, Julie. So I'm going to start answering, and I think Mateo is going to jump in afterwards. So actually, before telling you the challenges we faced to access data reporting domestic violence, I think it is important to understand how the gender landscape and specifically the GBV data landscape looks like in Brazil and in Sao Paulo. So first, it's extremely difficult to access this type of data through open sources here. So usually you need to request access to this data through petitions and the law of access to information, but these are all bureaucratic processes that usually takes weeks, if not months, to be completed. So for instance, in the case of our project, we took an average 1.5 months to access the data we requested, specifically in the case of Sao Paulo. Second, one of the major problems in working with GBV data in Brazil is the decentralization. I think you already said that before. So it's the decentralization and lack of systematization of this data here. Recently, the Sao Paulo State Deputy Isa Pena finally managed to overthrow the veto of the state governor and proceeded with the bill that will force the executive power of Sao Paulo to centralize and systematize and publish data on violence against women. But you see, until 3 months ago, this was just a discussion. That means that if you wanted to study the numbers of reported violence against women, you would need to request data to at least 4 different sources: the civil police, the military police, the court of justice, and for medical and hospital data, these are usually managed by DataSource. Each of these institutions have different processes, different computing timeframes, and different web portals to which you need to access in order to request data. So in summary, the precise GBV data landscape in Sao Paulo was the biggest challenge we faced. And I believe this is still a similar situation for the majority, if not all, the states of Brazil. Furthermore, there is also not a strong culture of GBV data collection in the country. And I would say that this scenario is due to very little political will and also governance capacity to make this data public, available, and also reliable. But I will let also Mateo to complement some of these challenges for Bogota.
Thank you, Anna. So yeah, I think they're going to be similar. From my perspective, there were like 3 main challenges we came across when doing this report. So the first one, it was data collection was lacking in a context where it was very important. The context was obviously the COVID-19 pandemic. For example, there was no national strategy in the country to collect this information. So we have to go like to the specific city and their resources and their data collection institutions to obtain the data. Luckily, Bogota, for example, has already institutionalized this. But if we were to analyze another city, that would be very, very hard. Also, although Bogota had good data with regards to gender-based violence, there is still a minor issue regarding rural communities. So for example, rural communities in Bogota don't have the best access to the services that women in the city do have, right? So specifically, there's a locality in Bogota called Sumapaz, where distances are very long and the internet and cell phone services are weak. So although there are good data, there's still some minor issues in collection. And yeah, the second main challenge I think would be like data requesting and accessing. Like Anna just said, in Bogota, the time to obtain the data wasn't 1.5 months, I think you said, Anna. But it still took a lot of time, and it's supposed to be open. All of this data is supposed to be open. So this has like two main implications for a report like this. First of all, with regards to the timeliness of the data, it's always going to lag a little bit behind of the investigation. So if you ask for it, let's say in May and you receive it in June, data is going to be outdated, right? And then the other thing is that if, again, for this report, we constructed a certain model with certain variables, and you ask for certain variables to, for example, the police, and then you realize later on that you need other variables, you'll have to go again through all this bureaucratic process of asking for data with regards to specific variables. So that's like the second consequence that this data access challenge brought on the report, I think. And finally, there was a lack of, I think, interoperability between the government levels. And this leads to duplication of data and then yeah, other problems with regards to the model. So for example, Bogota, the Bogota government and the national government have two different helplines. One is called the Línea Púrpura, which is the Bogota helpline, and one is the Línea 155, which is the national helpline. There is no ID between both helplines, so people can actually call both helplines and that registry would be duplicated. So that's like another problem. And yeah, I think those were the main challenges with regards to data accessibility and collection.
Thank you, Mateo. Thank you, Ana. And here I want to highlight that we're talking about two countries, Brazil and Colombia, that rank very high in terms of statistical capacity, right? And we're talking within those countries about two cities that are the Bogota, the political capital of the city of the country, and in the case of São Paulo, the economic capital of Brazil, right? So cities that also have high capacities in terms of data collection as compared to other cities in those countries. And there we face those types of challenges. Sinia, I want to now ask you a question. You were the lead, the technical lead for the team in this project, and your team had to analyze and combine data from multiple sources, as we just heard, right? To be able to estimate the report rates per locality. Could you tell us a little bit more about the technical challenges that this generated? Mateo already mentioned the lack of interoperability, the lack of timeliness, but what did this generate in terms of analyzing the data, particularly regarding comparability?
Yeah, sure. So I will try to structure my answer in different stages. So since we have access to the databases from different organizations or institutions, the first challenge for the team was to join these databases to measure the cases of violence. So the ideal join is to have a variable that reflects the different types of violence against women and girls. Unfortunately, this variable doesn't exist, or it exists in each database, but it exists with different definition of violence according to each institution. It's important to notice that each data source, for example, emergency call service, have their own questionnaire and variables according to their needs. Unfortunately, the definitions of violence against women and girls are not homogeneous across the different support services. So here we need to be very careful filtering the databases to have a manual join and create a unique database. So this was the first join. The second challenge was to measure the cases of violence in the same time period and the same granularity, temporal granularity. So our best scenario was to have the registers in real time. In general, the service help of calls has this time in real time, but the other institutions has the data aggregated by month or by year. So same problem for the spatial granularity, where GBV data was recorded, aggregated by city, for example. So it's impossible to make general public policy recommendations for a whole city with different structure and society profiles and without any knowledge of real-time trends, for example, COVID-19 epidemic. So in this case, we need to, the data science team need to have a lot of hypotheses to try to minimize this granularity, temporal and spatial, and to have a trend of rates, of violence of rates. So at this step, we are only measuring the number of cases reported, but the big future challenge will be how can we measure prevalence and incidence respecting the personal data and security of each woman. This challenge can be solved with technology, but first it is important to be clear about GBV data privacy and security, as well as the data governance of this type of data. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sinia. And I think it's important to highlight that one of the last things you mentioned, that we're talking here about a project that was built upon measuring the number of cases reported, right? And we know that that leaves a lot of the cases that actually happen outside of that realm. So there are many challenges to be able to continue working in that direction to better estimate the prevalence. And actually, as a segue, Yvette, the last question I want to ask about this project in particular is regarding the limitations, right? And to put it in other terms, what more can be done to continue leveraging GBV data and combat underreporting in the Latin American context?
Yes, Julie. Well, as Ana, Mateo, and Sinia already pointed out, even though we had access to 3, 4, and even in some cases 5 data sources of domestic violence in each of the 3 countries that we were working, there were many gaps in the data that really limited our findings. But at the same time, GBV data is definitely still one of the greatest tools we have to advocate for the elimination of violence against women and girls and to draw policy insights. So in our experience, leveraging available data is particularly hindered by 2 factors. This is how I would like sort of sum up what has already been said. And one is a lack of articulation between institutions, both from public institutions, so the government and civil society. And 2 is a lack of open or easily accessible data, right? And so to address this issue, one of the initiatives that we have been thinking about for the past year and a half already at Data Pop Alliance and began to devise is the creation of a GBV monitor. And this would be basically a platform that centralizes both quantitative and qualitative data that is collected by public institutions and by civil society. And for us, this initiative could really help to promote their organizations periodically collect and share the data that is up to date, and that they do so under strict and shared privacy safety protocols. Moreover, I really think that the existence of this monitor could really help to contribute to foster the standardization of data collection methodologies. And so by doing it with the same approach, the data would be easier to understand by those using it for research or for advocating purposes, but also to analyze it and compare it with different databases, right? Which would, like, for example, help to improve the measurement of prevalence. Another important thing that could come up from an initiative like this is that we could help promote the adoption of intersectional and feminist approaches, which, as you said, they are really needed when we look at the data. The big challenge, of course, when we talk of something like this is the sustainability of a platform. That means that we really need the collective engagement and commitment of different relevant actors in a country and ideally in a region such as Latin America, but this could be replicated in other regions too, of course. But to close this point, achieving a project like this in which actors are committed around a same purpose and utilizing the same methodologies could ensure improved accessibility, transparency, the quality of the data, and the sustainability of the GBV data itself.
Thank you very much, Yvette. And I think you make a great point, which is this effort requires working in partnership, right? So it requires being able to rely and leverage civil society data as well as government data, and be able to foster more long-term partnerships in terms of access to data too, right? To try to break the cycle of lack of timeliness of the data. So let's close the discussion on this project in particular and move to our second session, which will be focused on lesson learned and opportunities. And here we're going to broaden the discussion to include projects and experiences working with gender data beyond GBV data, right? And this is crucial because we know that gender data gaps are pervasive across sectors, across countries. In fact, we recommend taking a look at this book, which I put here next to me, which you might know and you won't be able to see because of the algorithm. But it's basically Invisible Women by Caroline Priado Perez. And it provides a lot of evidence from different sectors about this systematic erasure of women from data. And this translates into a passive form of violence that comes from invisibilization, right? So we're gonna broaden the discussion to include also gender data. And I want to start mentioning a few projects that come from other programs at Data Pop Alliance. In particular, we have a program that's called Ethical Digital Transformation, where we support, provide strategic support, evaluation of digital strategies from different types of organizations. And we have some gender projects that intersect with this program. And Matteo, you have carried out evaluations of digital strategies from international institutions using a gender lens. And I want to ask you, based on your research and your experience in these projects, what would you say are some of the gaps and opportunities in adopting a gender perspective, specifically in the creation of databases and in capacity building for artificial intelligence projects?
Okay, yeah, thank you, Julie, for that question. So first, let me say that there's actually an increasing interest in studying this intersection between the AI sector and gender. This doesn't mean that gender bias hasn't been studied enough in the AI sector, but the explicit intersection is understudied, right? So a testament to that is that, like you mentioned, Julie, we've been carrying out gender assessments in projects that try to further strengthen AI resources on the one hand and AI capacities on the other. What have we seen from these projects? Our main focus was to see how they were embedding gender perspective into these initiatives. So I think the main opportunities are both in the creation of AI databases and in the capacity building of individuals. On the one hand, there is increasingly interest in including data that is not normally personally identifiable to assess things that are related to gender. So one such example of this is like using geolocation data and GIS systems in mapping and analyzing the prevalence and incidence of GBV, something that relates a lot to what we were talking about in our report, specifically the geographic factors, specifically to help identify the geographic factors that influence help seeking or resource acquisition for victims, obviously. In capacity building, the main opportunity that we found is the upskilling of women that want to enter STEM-related careers, right? So as we all know, STEM careers are very male-dominated, and capacity building in AI could be a nice course or a nice way in which a woman could enter STEM careers, right? So that's like the opportunities we found in capacity building. And finally, the main challenges are a bit contradictory to what I just said. So although AI is including new technologies to analyze gender outcomes, there's still little information on how that can affect AI data can affect gender. For example, Earth observation data is still not so clear how, because it's satellite imagery, how that relate to gender. So I mean, there's still a lot of analysis and investigation that could go on in that direction. And then in capacity building, the main challenge is that people think that including gender perspective or embedding gender perspective in capacity building activities stops at having a 50-50 participation rate, right? And there are other things that should be considered. For example, is the course actually reaching women groups that are interested in the subject? Are the benefits and capacities that are being learned and adopted in these courses learned at the same rate and at the same quality between men and women? Or, for example, are women lecturers being included in capacity building programs? These are things that are still needed and are still have to be improved upon. But yeah, I mean, there's still a long way to go and a lot of opportunities in which we could help out in the AI sector with regards to gender perspective.
Thank you, Mateo. And here also, I think it's important to highlight, you mentioned, right, there are both technical challenges, but also like social cultural challenges. And this we see when working with gender mainstreaming in general, that there are cultural barriers that we need to break to be able, for example, to ensure that more women are having access to STEM careers, right? In addition to very concrete creation of opportunities. I want to move to another project that our team has recently worked on, which is the country gender equality profile for Liberia, which was done in support with support from the UN Women Liberia. Anna, you were the project manager for that project, and I understand you had to work and coordinate with multiple stakeholders involved in the project and therefore involved in gender and gender data, right? And that included local consultants, government agencies in Liberia, data sources providers. Can you tell us a little bit what you learned from having to work and coordinate with such a broad array of stakeholders?
Yes, of course. I think that after the pandemic and the concerning rise in numbers of like in terms of like reports of domestic violence, a lot of different actors realize, or they are starting to realize, the importance of gender data for practically every single aspect of sustainable development. And in the case of Liberia, we built a country gender equality profile. That is, we analyzed the state of gender equality at the national level. But to do so, we had to navigate through different sectors that together make up the country. So at the same time, we are analyzing gender inequality in terms of like lack of women's economic empowerment. I'm also analyzing gender inequality or how women's economic empowerment impact other areas, such as rural development, the energy sector, infrastructure. So you see how when you see how the system is connected and how gender inequality is transversal within the system, you manage to get different actors to sit together and have a conversation asking themselves, how are we going to tackle these issues together? And in the case of Liberia specifically, there was also a clear political will to make gender equality a priority in the development agenda of the country. And this also facilitated the process of like coordinating different actors. But of course, this is always supported by evidence-based analysis. So by using data to provide this evidence-based picture of how gender equality looks in the country, it was also easier to trigger the interest and of course also the concern among different actors to work using this data. In the case of Liberia, one of the biggest challenges we faced was precisely the lack of national databases that would allow us to put together this analysis. So we rely on the information mainly from international data sources. But once the actors understood, so the actors involved in this project understood that we cannot provide recommendations and neither foster change without gender data, this has also become a priority in the country's own list of activities. So collect national data on gender. For example, a lot of people might not be aware that gender inequality is extremely harmful for economic growth, and that in Liberia, agriculture represents one of the most important sectors of the country's economy, and still they face the biggest challenges in terms of vulnerability in the sector, considering that most of the women working in agriculture in Liberia, they do not own the land in which they produce. So all of this that I have just said is 100% based on gender data analysis. And to understand even more what are the constraints that women face in agriculture or in other sectors, we need data. And in this specific case, we would need at least 4 different stakeholders working together. So the Ministry of Agriculture, the Ministry of Gender, the Liberia Land Authority, and so on. So when you start like putting these pieces together and you show to these stakeholders how the like tackling the issue of gender data gap would only work with like this collaborative effort, they start realizing and putting this as also a priority. So that's how we did for Liberia, for example. And finally, of course, there is a huge challenge to work with a project in Liberia because I'm based in Brazil. So I'm in a different time zone. And also I do not have the same knowledge about how gender issues are lived and experienced in Liberia, such as the local community. So that's the importance of working with local consultants. In this project, in the case of the country gender equality, for example, we worked with 3 different local consultants that would contextualize the data that we were analyzing and also help us to coordinate the project at the local ground. So they also would help us to understand not only the dynamics of gender inequality in the country, but what should be a priority for the government, for example. So just to finalize, I would say that having the participation of local people working together with you is quite key to coordinate projects of such a dimension as the country gender equality profile. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. And it strikes me that it seems like putting the data at the center of the conversation, right? Putting the evidence back at the center of the conversation is also a way to federate and coordinate with all these different actors, right? We know that gender here, I'm assuming preaching to the core, but really gender can be a sensitive and a very political issue, right? Depending on the contextual, the context of the country or others. And we've seen backlashes in terms of women's rights in different countries across different regions recently. So the fact that also being able to bring back the discussion to the evidence is crucial, it seems, to coordinate those different actors, right? Moving to another project that we have ongoing, which is with the Mexican Research Center from CINESTAV, so coming back to this side of the Atlantic, Latin America. As part of this project, the team is conducting an institutional gender assessment. And like most of DataPop's projects, it involves adopting a mixed method approach that uses both qualitative and quantitative data. Yvette, you are leading this project. Can you tell us more about why it's important to conduct this type of mixed method analysis?
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Julie. So I want to give a little bit of context into this project, because even though we're covering a wider range of gender issues beyond gender-based violence data, it does include it because we're looking at issues such as workplace harassment and abuse, right? And so, well, CINESTAV is a public institution. They have 10 research centers across Mexico. And while working with them, we had the opportunity to collect primary data, both of quantitative and qualitative nature, which is something we don't always get to do. For this, we conducted three main methods. We used 3 main methods. The first one was an extensive desk review of institutional documents. And here what we wanted to do it was to understand the normative framework from a gender perspective. In other words, what were the regulations put in place to promote gender equality and to deal with workplace harassment and abuse, and what wasn't, right, put in place. Secondly, we conducted 4 separate focus groups with women from different population groups. This was really important because we were not only dealing with researchers, but also with postgraduate students, administrative staff, and maintenance staff. In parallel to these 2 first methods, we also designed and implemented a national online survey where we were aiming or targeting at the whole population in the 10 research centers. And so what really adopting this mixed methods approach allowed us was on one side to confirm the importance of specific problems and gender themes which have emerged across the focus groups and the survey. And at the same time, the focus groups enable us to delve into the nuance of the lived experience of women, specifically in some cases like how the abuse takes place and what enables it and how it develops. But in complement to that, the survey gave us a perspective in terms of the magnitude of specific issues and allow us to identify certain patterns of behaviors and beliefs. In other words, what I'm saying is that these methods are complementary and really can enrich the work. But lastly, I really want to highlight that using a mixed methods approach also allow us to draw insights and to use big data or alternative data sources. And this is a great option, especially when no other data is available. For those that maybe are less familiar with non-traditional data, this, for example, might include from social media posts to your internet search history, to phone and financial records, to satellite image, as Mateo was mentioning before, and many others, right? And these are usually data that is collected passively, so we're not answering a survey or filling a survey, etc. But actually, it's just being our action and interactions are being recorded in these devices, and so. In one of the projects in which we got to do this was not necessarily this one, but the first one that we were referring to, the one in Bogota and in Sao Paulo, we used Google mobility data to understand the impact of the mobility measures resulting from the COVID-19 confinement. And overall, what we found is that the great restrictions really did impact the capacity of women to go to a police station and report the violence. And that meant that they were changing the behavior and using the hotlines a lot more. This wasn't exactly the case in each of the 3 contexts we worked on, but in some of them, it really was, and it seemed to have impacted in that way. And so, yeah, being able to use non-traditional data can really bring a different perspective and provide data-driven evidence that supports your project.
Thank you, Yvette, and thank you for bringing up the big data sources, these alternative data sources. These are at the core also of DataPop's work, right? And the idea here is really to use them as a complement to the existing data sources. So actually, to be able to conduct analysis using big data, usually you need ground truth. So you need like traditional data and statistics. So this doesn't contradict at all what we said at the beginning, in the sense that we still need to reinforce those types of traditional data, but at the same time, we can leverage these new types of data for additional insights, right? And I know we have a question on the chat, and I want to remind you that you can keep adding your questions. If that's okay, we're going to keep them to answer together. And we have one last question to go through with our panelists, and then we'll get into the Q&A part. So please do add your question to the chat if you have any. Xenia, I want to ask the last question to you. DataPop's DNA is at the intersection of social and data science, right? And in our projects, we always bring together data scientists, mathematicians, statisticians, working alongside with social scientists and qualitative methods researcher. Why is it particularly important to have such multidisciplinary teams when working with GBV data? And additionally, what technical and non-technical skills are helpful in those types of projects?
Okay, well, to answer these questions, let's do a quick review of stats and talk about the errors. So in general, in data, we have 2 types of errors. Type 1 error is incorrectly rejecting a null hypothesis, right? Type 2 error is incorrectly failing to reject a null hypothesis. And now let's introduce a type 3 error that is correctly rejecting the wrong null hypothesis. What is this? In other words, using all the right tools, methodologies, models to answer the wrong questions. So this type 3 error is the most common error in the data science teams, in the data teams in general. Why? Because data teams spend a lot of effort developing maps, codes, and looking for the data, but they don't spend enough time on how to ask the right question and how to round end-to-end data drive solution without messing up. So in this case, well, it's a general problem, but specific in this case, decision intelligence is the answer to fix this type 3 error. It is applied data science augmented by the other science knowledge, in this case, social science, to look at decision-making as a whole. Well, in particular, to study GBV data, gender expert skills are necessary to create the database, for example, as we talked before, to study together the numbers, to understand the patterns, and to do a causal analysis of the rate of violence. Work on this causal analysis is not an easy task because gender is intersectional and it touches different sectors of the society. So we need experts with different sectors and skills that help us to analyze and to understand this data. During a GBV project in general, we have sensitive data. So it's important to respect the private data of each person from an ethical and legal perspective. So the team need to be guided by a person who knows exactly the terms and conditions to be respectful on the manner of how we analyze the data and how we can communicate this data. So to summarize all these parts, in the gender projects in which we have worked in DPA, the profiles that have integrated the team are data scientists, gender experts, economic and political science experts, and all this team is guided by an ethical and legal gender perspective. And in all cases, we need a transversal and intersectional perspective to know exactly how all these factors of all the sectors can impact the gender-based violence data. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Senia, for those clarifications. So we're going to wrap up the discussion at this point. That leaves us about 10 minutes for answering some of the questions that are being posted on our chat. Let's take the first question from Germain, wondering why every year we have a day for the elimination of violence against women, which allows to sensitize people, right, and raise awareness. But unfortunately, it seems like things don't change. Change is hard, and especially here in North Kivu. So thank you, Germain, for joining us from DRC. What strategies can we develop beyond awareness raising to tackle gender-based violence? Any of our panelists want to take this question?
I think I can take this one. Thank you, Germain, for your question. So I know that sometimes, yeah, it looks like that only sensitization campaigns are not enough because they might raise awareness, but I think what we need is actually efforts. So that's where it comes the issue of like cooperation that I think it goes very aligned with what you just asked in the next question. So for instance, how Data Pop Alliance works with different like organizations. I'm not going to answer this question, but I want to highlight the importance of these like different cooperations between different stakeholders. So the government, the civil society, the public sector, and of course the local community as well. So for instance, we have seen in several different projects that have been taking place in Africa that one strategies that they have been using, for instance, to foster the change of traditional norms precisely to tackle violence against women in communities that like adopt very religious or tradition beliefs. Is precisely the gatekeeper strategy. So the gatekeeper strategies are strategies that work specifically with leaders in the local communities. I think this is a very interesting way to like try to look for different like alternatives in addition to like the usual sensitization campaigns that we take every year. So like local with leaders of the local community. So for instance, taking the example of Brazil as well, I know that like leaders of the favelas, of the slums, are also very much heard and listened by the local people. So the people that usually do not have access to the information that are provided by awareness campaigns. because in like developing and also poor countries, as you might know, it's very difficult to make the message to reach this audience. So working with the people that actually make the message to reach this audience, it's like one key strategy to make violence against women, so like to fight against violence against women. So working with local community and like local leaders of these communities it's quite key and essential to make it happen. And this is like strategies that have been happening or having been taking place by different like institutions or like in collaboration with international development organizations. They have been growing this type of strategies. But I hope like this is now an alternative to your question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anna. And let's take a second question from Nicole. How does cooperation between Data Pop Alliance and NGOs at the local level is currently looking like in regards to GBV data-related policymaking? Yvette, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Julie. Yeah, something I would like to say to the excellent response by Anna, by the way, just complimented German's first question. I just want to say, like, even today's event, it's rather than actually celebrating the day, what we're trying to do is advocating for the use of GBV data, right? To approach different issues related to gender-based violence, but also to understand how to use it better, how to leverage it. So for me personally, I think it's more that advocacy to understand the issue and how we can tackle it, which I think we're still missing, right? We really want to understand how to approach it, and there are so many ways. And for us that we work with data specifically, that is one way, right? To promote data literacy, and then I'm sorry, just going back to the question. Yes, so I can think right now of two specific ways in which we work with local organizations in DataPop. The first one is through our CODES. So these are councils for the development and ethics of the projects. And what we do is basically partner in a voluntary way with local organizations, but also different stakeholders that are relevant to each project to get an independent perspective on the development of the project, and also make sure that we are following and adopting a very strong ethical perspective, right? So we have reunions or meetings with them periodically and talk to them about what we're doing and what are the issues they see, and we get their feedback, which for us is really, really important, right? Because we want to make sure that we are respecting the integrity of women and we are causing no harm. But then another way, it's coming in an upcoming project. We are just starting to work on this, for example, and this might involve interviews and focus group with survivors, and working closely with survivors, as all of us in this school know, it's a very sensitive issue. And in this case, which is also in a context that is very far away from us in Africa, we will be working with a local organization that already is familiar and knows closely these survivors to conduct the interviews, and then we will use the results to conduct the analysis. So that's really important to protect and respect the integrity of the women and girls. That would be my answer. Thank you, Julie, and thank you for making the question, Nicole.
Thank you, Yvette. We have time to take one last question from Maria. Is there an international GBV data framework or good practices to turn to in order to design better data collection and increase comparability?
Yes, I will take this.
Thank you, Sinia.
Okay, so first of all, I think that this part of a national strategy, because this is a national data strategy, this will be part of the general consensus of a government. And for example, I would like to highlight here the case of Mexico City, that they have an open data site where we can download directly, and we can connect directly an API for this data for helpline services and the registers. So this is part of the transparency of a government that decide to share this data for the people in one sense, and to be clear on how this can be interoperable. We have only 2 institutions in this open data. Then in other cases is more difficult. We are hoping that this will progress, but the ideal is to have legal definitions, clear legal definitions for all type of violence that can be structured inside all the ministers of a government and inside all the organizations to have a better collection. And if we don't have that in a governmental side, inside each organization, for example, we can start thinking to communicate better our data. The best is to have exactly definition of the legal definition of the country to clarify and to be in line with what we want to analyze. So if the legal definition in the country have all the definition of violence, we need to be linked with this legal definition to create a new database. For example, if we are an organization and if we don't have any input for the government side. And then I think that if all the organizations start working in this manner, we can start thinking in a good practice of database collection. In other sense, be careful with privacy, be careful with sensitive data, be careful with the security of this data, because the security of data is exactly the security of the women that are in the other side of this data. So be careful about all the impact that this database can have. And if it's possible, anonymize this data, aggregate this data to communicate, and all these GDPR guides that we have, we need to be careful on all this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sinia. We're gonna wrap up questions at this point. I wanna launch a quick exit poll for everyone. So it's gonna pop up on your screen right now. And again, as we mentioned at the beginning, really the goal of the session was to share some of the challenges we faced as a team, but also some of the opportunities and some of the lessons learned from these experiences, right? Because we hope that this can not only highlight the importance of continuing to use gender-based violence data, gender data, and taking actions that can improve access to it, in terms of, because it's so crucial and so important to adequately understand the realities of women living across different countries, not only to raise awareness, but also to inform better policymaking and the efforts from civil society organizations. So I also want to take the opportunity to remind that in collaboration with Facebook, we've launched a gender data course that is freely available in the Tech Change platform. It's fully self-paced, and you can register and complete the course at any time. So you're welcome to join that course if you want to keep learning more about gender-based violence. I'm gonna end the poll right now and share the results, which I think I failed to do the first time. And well, thank you so much for your contribution. We're glad to see that hopefully some insights of this conversation is relevant to your work and can potentially be implemented. The video, we have recorded the session, so it will remain available in our social media channels and in our website if you want to share it with any colleagues further ahead. Thank you very much. Have a great day or end of your day, and we'll be in touch. Thank you to the panelists, and thank you to everyone who joined.
Thank you, Julie.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.